Welcome everyone, this is On Just Restart, and this time we're talking about what's next for Nintendo announcements after the lack of announcements at Game Awards 2021. So every single year, at least since the Game Awards in its current form has been happening since about, I want to say 2014, we've been getting consistent Nintendo announcements at the Game Awards. Breath of the Wild has taken place in 3 of them. Smash Bros. Has had announcements in a couple of them. We've seen things like Bayonetta 3 and No More Heroes 3. There is a history of Game Awards Nintendo announcements. But this year, there was nothing directly from Nintendo. We did get an update on the Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak DLC, another monster and a little piece at the beginning of the game. That came out during the pre-show. So we technically got something in terms of exclusive Nintendo Switch content there. And Sonic Frontiers, while it's coming out for every platform, that does include the Switch, so it wasn't like there wasn't anything at all for Nintendo fans or Switch owners at the Game Awards, but in comparison to every previous year, yes, there was way less than ever before. So this time around what we're going to be doing is sort of talking about that situation, but also getting into what didn't show up and when we could sort of see some announcements from Nintendo. When can we sort of expect the next big thing? When can we get a Nintendo Direct most likely? So that's what we're focusing on today. Now, before we jump into things, let me very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on screen. You can check that all out. It is linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe. So there were a number of things that people were hoping to see at the Game Awards, and not really any of it showed up. Myself was thinking maybe some sort of Metroid announcement, or maybe a Breath of the Wild 2 announcement. I had a predictions video, and I was just straight up wrong. Well, to give myself some credit, I did speculate that Monster Hunter Rise was likely to show up during the show. But I did say that if I was wrong about Breath of the Wild 2 showing up at the Game Awards, I would have to pay some sort of price. So what I'm thinking is that at some point in the next few weeks, I will put together a video, maybe sometime in January at this point because of all the Christmas holidays and such, but I'll put together some sort of video where I will eat an assortment of popsicles and then take those sticks from those popsicles and create a Sheikah slate. It'll be fun, it'll be my punishment for being wrong, and I'll probably put together some sort of cool concept for the video, or at least something interesting at some point. So that will be my punishment. I want to make good on my promise there. I predicted it and I was wrong, and there will be the payment. But I'd also like to say, technically, we did see Breath of the Wild 2 to some capacity at the Game Awards, because one, yes, it was a nomination for most anticipated game, but then also we did get 2 sizzle reels during the Game Awards. In the first half of the Game Awards, we saw the 2021 sizzle reel, which showed a whole bunch of games that came out this year for Nintendo Switch, and then towards the latter half of the show, we got another sizzle reel commercial that included a whole bunch of 2022 games, and it included Breath of the Wild 2. There they used the marketing, the sequel to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Nintendo's still maintaining that for the time being. But there they sort of reaffirmed for like the 5th time that Breath of the Wild 2 is slated for 2022. It's a part of their marketing plan. We keep seeing different promotional things that imply that Breath of the Wild 2 is around the corner. So I do think it is quote unquote around the corner, and by around the corner, sometime in 2022, my opinion, late 2022. But still, it's part of Nintendo's plan. So it was involved in the Game Awards. It is coming, I think, sometime next year. But Nintendo decided not to show it off, which I do find to be strange because, as I said earlier, Breath of the Wild has been shown off in multiple Game Awards presentations. And after Breath of the Wild, it seemed like Nintendo started focusing on Smash Bros. To show off at the Game Awards. But now that Smash Bros. Is done, and with Breath of the Wild 2 coming out next year, it felt like a pretty good, logical little hop, not even a leap, to say that Breath of the Wild 2 is a likely candidate to get some sort of announcement during the show. But that did not happen. Why didn't it happen? Of course, hindsight is 2020. You could argue that, well, Breath of the Wild 2 probably isn't coming out in the beginning of the year, although while that may not be confirmed, it is likely at this point, I would say, to be coming out the second half of the year. So with that in mind, maybe they didn't feel like they needed to show it off at the Game Awards. But also, there is a whole titling situation. At some point or another, Nintendo probably should give us a proper title, and in my opinion, they have to do it sooner than later, because just calling it the sequel to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild with all these different commercials and promotional materials just isn't the best way to market it. So I do think something is coming soon, which will bring me to my bigger point later into the video. But anyway, with the sequel to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, they didn't show it off. It's peculiar. It's hard to say exactly why, but it may just come down to it doesn't fit quite exactly with what Nintendo was planning. They didn't feel they needed to promote Breath of the Wild 2 this time around at the Game Awards. Perhaps they have a clear-cut plan of what they're going to do, and once they start opening the gate, it's going to be a floodgate. There's going to be so much information coming out for the game, and I guess maybe they just want to be very careful about how they go about doing that. But then what about other games? Well, if we look at other games they could have shown off, they could have talked about Legends Arceus, they could have talked about Splatoon 3, they could have talked about Kirby and the Forgotten Land or Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hope, but all those games would fall under the family-oriented category, and I hate to just classify those as family games, but that's usually what the Game Awards does with a lot of Nintendo games. And the point I'm really getting at here is that those kinds of games aren't the kind of games that Nintendo would love to sort of push at the Game Awards because the audience doesn't fit quite right with them. But then there are games that probably would be more fitting of that, and one would be Bayonetta 3. Why didn't we see more Bayonetta 3? Well, we just got a whole bunch of information for Bayonetta 3 during a September Nintendo Direct. Maybe Nintendo didn't feel like it was necessary, or even Platinum Games, to show even more information just a couple months later. We waited so long just to get the information we got for Bayonetta 3, and it was quite a lot, and it takes some effort to actually put together another trailer like that, so perhaps they felt that it just wasn't necessary to do it again such a short time after its big sort of flood of media and information. But then what about some new things? What about some speculated Metroid Dread DLC, or the Metroid Prime Remaster, or the supposed Xenoblade Chronicles 3 that was apparently rumored to get shown off at the award show, or maybe a Fire Emblem game or something like that? All of those things, while I would say they are core-centric and wouldn't fall exactly under the family category, they're also not as big as something like Smash Bros. Or Zelda. And they are the kind of things that I think Nintendo could have theoretically shown off and they would have done relatively well. They haven't been announced yet. They are speculative. We don't even know if they're coming out next year, so because we don't even have the timing on them, or even know for a fact that they're real and about to come out, I feel like that's already reason enough to be doubtful of them getting announced at the Game Awards. Now, specifically with Xenoblade Chronicles 3, in my opinion, that was never really a likely bet for the Game Awards because the Game Awards doesn't really appreciate Japanese RPGs. Xenoblade Chronicles 2, back when it should have been nominated for one of the top RPGs of the year, was completely forgotten. So to think that they would then turn around and have the initial reveal for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 at the Game Awards, a show that is biased against JRPGs, I don't think that would have been the best call. In other words, most of the games that Nintendo has coming out, or maybe has coming out throughout next year, probably weren't going to be a good fit for the Game Awards. I think Metroid would have been, but with things like that, maybe it just wasn't ready yet. Maybe what they have planned for next year is a Metroid Prime Remaster, but because Dread was nominated, maybe they wanted to focus on just Dread for now, let it ride its hype train, and then the Metroid Prime Remaster, if it is actually coming out next year, they talk about that, say, maybe E3 time. Give Dread some time to be the spotlight for Metroid fans. But then with Dread being the spotlight, why didn't we get a DLC announcement? Well, one possibility is just that there isn't any major DLC planned. Now, I still think there's hope for some DLC, but if it's not announced within the next couple months, I'm going to start transitioning away from thinking that that's a possibility. And to be honest with you, I'm already starting to think that it's not even going to be paid DLC. If anything, it'd probably just be some sort of free DLC update, maybe a free challenge mode or a new difficulty or something like that. Not actually like an expansion of content like a whole other level or something along those lines where it's like a paid wave 1 and 2 throughout the year. And the big reasoning behind it is, one, because they didn't announce it yet, but also two, the rumor is that Metroid Prime Remaster is coming out next year. So if that's coming out next year, are we really going to be getting paid DLC with new content throughout the year for Metroid Dread and a Metroid Prime Remaster in the same year? They might sort of conflict a little bit. I think in theory they could be spaced out where they could both work, but maybe Nintendo doesn't want to go that gung-ho and be that crazy about doing all of this extra Metroid content. Things may be a bit more spaced out. But on that note, perhaps Metroid Prime Remaster could be pushed up a little bit, and maybe we have Dread DLC come out throughout 2022. That's a possibility, so if it is a possibility, if it is happening, I would say it would be announced in an early year of Nintendo Direct. Which brings me to the big point of the video. When should we start expecting to see new major Nintendo announcements? Well, because there wasn't really any major Game Awards announcements for Nintendo, I think that actually puts more of an emphasis on having an earlier Direct because it's an even longer gap without a lot of Nintendo information. The last time we got it was a September Direct. It was a pretty good presentation. I feel like we're still not too far removed yet, but with no big announcements at the Game Awards, there's a little bit more of a need to have a presentation early on in the year. So how early on could we be talking about here? Well, last year we had it in February, and there is a history of having a Direct in either February or March. There was 2017 where we had the big Nintendo Switch presentation. That was a big deal. So maybe it's conceivable that it could even happen in January, but I'm going to assume that it won't be in January. I've been wrong too many times about hoping for a Direct in January at this point. I'll stick with February. I think February is the best bet in my opinion, because by February, Nintendo will start to actually need to start giving us information on actual release dates for games coming out in the coming months. And as far as I'm aware, there's no major games slated for February, so it might be a good idea to have a Direct then, maybe have some Shadow drop things, some DLC drop things, make a lot of announcements then, so that Nintendo can carry a bit of the spotlight, and then games start coming out throughout March. We know about Triangle Strategy coming out in March, and I believe it's not confirmed, but it was leaked that Advance Wars is coming out in April. So if I had to make an early prediction, and I'm not going to say like a 100% prediction yet, I'm going to wait for a little bit more information, but my best bet is a February Nintendo Direct. It could conceivably go up to March, but because of the whole Game Awards situation, I do feel like it's even more likely for it to be February than March. And now, because of that, I also think there's a possibility it could be in January, but we do have Pokemon Legends Arceus coming out late January. Nintendo and Pokemon Company may focus a lot of their marketing on this game. It's going to be a big deal. I think it has a lot of sales potential here. It's a open-ish adventure Pokemon game made by Game Freak, so they're going to push it hard throughout January, so they may not need to really do much else until February. But, similar to the 2017 presentation, that was a big year, and we've looked at the lineup of games for this year, and we consider some of the things that are rumored as well. 2022 is also going to be a really big year. Now, I don't expect there to be new hardware because we just got Switch OLED, and if you look at the history of Switch revisions and even 3DS revisions, we at least have to wait a year and a few months, and it's usually not a more expensive model after we just got a more expensive model. But there have been some rumors of Switch Pro, so if Nintendo is planning something crazy, maybe they do some sort of weird presentation of new hardware along with showing off a bunch of their games in January, which would then fully explain why Nintendo was so vacant from the Game Awards. I don't expect that. I think Nintendo is planning a big year, but not because of hardware, just that they're going to want to push the Switch OLED that's already out there with a lot of their really cool, awesome games this year, and it's going to be a nice, awesome presentation. So I'm not expecting like a special January presentation. Maybe they throw a Direct in there, but my thinking right now is a February Nintendo Direct. Every normal year where there's not a big sort of pandemic going on, we get an earlier Nintendo Direct. So yes, February I think is a time for when we can maybe expect the next set of big Nintendo announcements. And hopefully then we finally get our tease or maybe reveal of the title for Breath of the Wild 2. Just a quick little tease at the end of the Direct, and then by E3 we get that big media blowout for the game. I know some people think that Zelda would be saved just for E3 or something like that, but keep in mind Smash Bros. Was announced in a March Nintendo Direct, Animal Crossing was announced in a September Nintendo Direct, Splatoon 3 was announced in a February Nintendo Direct just earlier this year. So there is a history of big games getting announcements or reveals during Nintendo Directs outside of E3 time, and Breath of the Wild 2 has already had two sort of informational drops. We could get a quick little title teaser just to let us know what it is so they can market the game throughout the year, and then summertime is when we have that big blowout, as I just said moments ago. But what do you guys think? When do you guys think we can expect the next big set of information from Nintendo, and probably a Direct or maybe something else? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways, everyone, this is On Just Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care.